It's likely you have a favorite player. The Australian cricket team is one of the most successful in the world, having won 6 one-day international World Cups, 2 Champions Trophies, and 1 T20 World Cup. But did you know that Australia was once a land for convicts and criminals? What's even more interesting is that today, 20% of Australia's population is descended from these very people. That means 1 in every 5 Australians today is a descendant of a convicted prisoner from the 18th or 19th century. The 7th or 8th generation of that criminal could be today's minister, scientist, player, or teacher. This context is what led to a controversy in the 1990s from remarks made by Sri Lankan cricket captain Arjuna Ranatunga. In response to a personal attack on him, in an article by Shane Warne, he said that their culture is thousands of years old, but everyone knows who the Australians are descended from. So, let's go back to the time when convicts first stepped foot on Australian soil, and how it transformed from a penal colony to the country it is today. Before we continue, if you haven't subscribed to Big Socho, please do so to keep getting informative and engaging videos like this. We appreciate your support. In the last decades of the 18th century, Britain was facing a serious problem. Crime was on the rise in its cities, and its jails were full. Britain had previously sent its convicts to its American colonies, but after America's independence in 1776, that practice stopped. Britain now needed a new land to send criminals to serve their sentences. Its eyes fell on the distant and mostly unknown land of Australia, which was called Terra Australis, or Southern Land. Although Dutch sailors had arrived there in 1606, and the English explorer Captain James Cook had later discovered parts of Australia, for most of the European world, the continent was still largely unexplored and new. On January 26, 1788, Britain's first fleet, which included more than 700 convicts, soldiers, and officers, arrived at Botany Bay. When this location proved unsuitable for farming, the fleet moved to Port Jackson. Both of these areas are in what is now the city of Sydney. At the new location, they established the first settlement, which they named New South Wales. This settlement was a prison that initially didn't even have walls. The convicts brought from Britain were subjected to hard labor. They toiled on this strange land, enduring an unsuitable climate and food shortages. But as their sentences were completed, most of them did not return to Britain. Instead, they stayed there, took up farming and other professions, and became part of the colonial economy. Over time, not just convicts, but also free settlers began to arrive in Australia. These newcomers included farmers, traders, and government officials. In the following decades, more colonies were established on Australian soil, such as Tasmania, Western Australia, South Australia, Victoria, and Queensland. This is how Australia's population began to grow. However, the Indigenous population had to pay a heavy price for this settlement. When British settlers arrived, millions of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people lived on the land. Their culture is considered one of the oldest in the world, estimated to be around 60,000 years old. They were divided into different tribes, had their own languages and culture, and a deep connection to the land. After the British occupation, these indigenous communities were systematically dispossessed of their lands. They were massacred, and several tribes were completely wiped out. Under the policy of the stolen generations, thousands of indigenous children were forcibly taken from their families and handed over to white farming families or church missionary institutions. This was done to civilize them, as was the practice of colonial Western powers at the time. This injustice continued until the middle of the 20th century. The turning point in Australia's history came in the 1850s with the discovery of gold in Victoria and New South Wales. This discovery completely changed the region. Millions of people from Europe and other parts of the world began to flock to Australia. This gave a huge boost to the Australian economy. Cities were populated, railways were built, and infrastructure was developed. From 1851 to 1871, Australia's population quadrupled, increasing from 430,000 to 1.7 million. Australia was no longer just a land of convicts, but was becoming a diverse society. At the same time, a new national identity began to emerge among the people who had settled there. The settlers now considered themselves not just British or European residents, but a separate nation with its own identity. In the late 19th century, a desire for self-governance and unification arose in the various colonies. They became convinced that if all the Australian colonies were united, they could better handle issues like defense, trade, and immigration. Finally, after many years of consultation, referendums, and debates, on January 1st, 1901, the 6 Australian colonies united to form the Commonwealth of Australia. Australia got its own parliament, prime minister, and constitution. However, constitutionally, it still remained under the British monarchy. During the First World War, Australian soldiers, under the ANZA, Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, fought on fronts like Gallipoli on the side of the Allied powers, Britain, Russia, and France. During the Second World War, Australia made the United States its biggest and closest ally, instead of Britain, especially as Japan was increasing its influence in Southeast Asia and the Pacific region. The Statute of Westminster in 1942, and then the Australia Act in 1986, gave Australia complete independence from the British Parliament, and Australia became a sovereign nation. However, it still formally recognizes the British monarch as the head of state. Today, Australia's total population is approximately 26.6 million, and about 38% of this population is made up of Indigenous people, which amounts to about 1 million individuals. This number may be small, but culturally, this community is still extremely strong and vibrant. Their languages, customs, and art are considered unique throughout the world. In the current Australian cricket team, Scott Boland and Darcy Short are of Indigenous Australian descent. In the past, Jason Gillespie and Daniel Christian, who played for the Australian cricket team, were also of Indigenous Australian descent. Every year, on January 26th, Australia celebrates Australia Day. This is the day when the first British convict fleet arrived in Australia in 1788. However, many Indigenous people know this day as Invasion Day, because for them, this day is a symbol of the occupation, massacre, and forced displacement from their land. For this reason, many Indigenous communities protest on January 26th and observe it as a day of mourning. Another important case is that of Ayers Rock, which the local people call Uluru. Uluru is a sacred mountain for them, a symbol of their stories, spiritual traditions, and connection to the land. For a long time, tourists used to climb this mountain, but at the request of the local people, climbing this rock was banned in 2019. Local people believe that climbing Uluru is an insult to their beliefs. Here's another interesting fact. When Australia became independent, being a convict or a descendant of one was considered a stigma. Many families hid their past during this time to maintain their status in society. But over time, Australian society began to accept that these convicts were, in fact, the founders of the country. Today, being a descendant of a convict is considered a badge of honor. These people are now proud to be among the founders of the country and the pioneers of farming there. Their stories are told in schools, universities, and public places. Many Australians proudly call themselves convict descendants because their ancestors persevered through difficult circumstances and built a successful society. Scott Morrison, who was Australia's Prime Minister from 2018 to 2022, was also a descendant of a convict. Another former Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, was also a descendant of a convict. Today, Australia is a successful and free democracy and a developed country. Its cities of Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and Perth are considered among the best in the world. In 2024, Australia's GDP was $1.75 trillion, making it the 13th largest economy in the world. Australia is a prominent country on the world stage in education, economy, research, environment, and sports. In addition, it is part of several American-led alliances designed to counter China's influence, including the Quad and AUKUS. 95% of Australia's land area is still empty today. Most of its population lives in coastal cities. The reason for this is that the early settlers settled in coastal areas. Much of Australia's interior is desert or semi-desert, known as the outback. Here, due to lack of rain, the land is barren and the weather is extremely harsh, so there is very little or no population. Australia is also a unique country in that 87% of its mammals, 93% of its reptiles, 94% of its frogs, and 45% of its bird species are not found anywhere else in the world. What did you think about this interesting history of Australia, a country founded by convicts? Please share your thoughts in the comments. And for more informative, investigative videos like this in the future, be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon. Thanks.